Rain clawed at the roof like it was trying to get inside. The hills of Appalachia were black with thunder and broken roads. At the edge of an old rural clinic, long abandoned, half forgotten, a young woman pounded on the door, soaked to the skin and clutching a feverish child in her arms. Her voice cracked through the storm. "Please. Someone. Help us." The man who opened the door. Dr. Luke Halstead. Once one of the country's top cardiologists, now just a ghost hiding in a small-town clinic he swore he'd never use again. He didn't ask questions. He didn't check IDs. He just saved her daughter's life. And everything changed. Because she wasn't just a scared mother. She was the daughter of a U.S. Senator. And an undercover journalist chasing the truth about the very system that left people like Luke, and his patients, behind. This is the true story of how one storm, one knock, and one act of quiet compassion reopened a clinic, shook Capitol Hill, and reminded a broken man what it means to heal. A story about second chances, unseen heroes, and the power of showing up, even when no one's watching. Before we begin, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit subscribe for more stories like this. Let's begin. The knock came just after midnight. Dr. Luke Halstead had been sitting at the kitchen table, alone with a lukewarm mug and an old clinic file he didn't remember pulling out. Outside, the Appalachian storm slammed against the roof like it wanted in. Thunder cracked. Rain punched the windows sideways. The power had flickered twice already. So when he heard it, the knock, he assumed it was the wind. Until it came again. Louder. 3 times. Fast. And then a voice, desperate. "Please, someone, help." Luke stood slowly, heart thudding. Nobody had knocked on the Halstead Clinic's door in 3 years. He crossed the narrow hallway, pushed aside the faded curtain, and flipped on the porch light. It buzzed, flickered, then bathed the front steps in dim yellow. A young woman stood there. Soaked to the skin, her hoodie clinging to her arms, hair plastered to her cheeks. She was cradling a little girl, maybe 6 years old, in her arms. The child's face was red and glistening with sweat. Her head lolled to the side. "She's burning up," the woman cried. "Her fever won't break. No roads, no ambulance, please, she needs help." Luke opened the door without a word. Inside. "Hurry." The clinic still smelled like disinfectant and dust. Luke hadn't planned to ever use it again. The exam table was bare. The lights dim. Cabinets full of expired supplies and regret. But his hands still remembered. The child was limp, her skin flushed and dangerously warm. Luke didn't need a thermometer to know she was spiking high, too high. "What's her name?" he asked, already moving. "Sophie," the woman said. "I'm Grace. She's my daughter." "How long's the fever?" "Since yesterday. I tried Tylenol, ice bath, nothing worked." She started mumbling, then stopped responding. Luke checked her pulse. Fast and shallow. Eyes glassy. She was slipping. "Can you help her?" Grace whispered. Luke didn't answer. He already was. He worked through the storm. Found an old 4 bag that hadn't turned. A dusty vial of acetaminophen, still good. He cooled Sophie with soaked towels, whispered steady reassurances that she couldn't hear. Grace sat nearby in silence, her arms folded tightly across her chest, watching every move. By 3:45 a.m., the girl's fever broke. Slowly. Almost like the storm outside, fierce, then fading. When Luke looked up, Grace was asleep, slumped forward in the visitor's chair, still holding her daughter's hand. Luke sat down across from them. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged in the room. The storm had passed by dawn. A thin gray light filtered through the clinic blinds, catching the dust in the air like ash in a still sky. The quiet was thick, no thunder, no wind, just the rhythmic beeping of the monitor and Sophie's soft, even breathing. Luke hadn't moved from his chair. Across from him, Grace stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, blinking away the haze of sleep. For a moment, she looked disoriented, then she saw her daughter. Sophie was still pale, but cooler now. Her cheeks no longer burned. Her small chest rose and fell with steady rhythm. "She's better?" Grace asked, voice rough. Luke nodded. "Fever broke around 4. Her body's still recovering. But she's stable." Grace let out a breath that shook her whole frame. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to Sophie's forehead, then pulled back, eyes damp. "Thank you," she said. Luke stood, knees stiff, and went to the sink to wash his hands. "What brought you out in the storm?" he asked without turning. "The nearest ER's over an hour away even in daylight." "I tried calling," she said. "Nobody picked up. The dispatcher said the bridges were washed out. Cell signal's dead up where we live. You were the only place with a light on." Luke glanced at the old kerosene lantern still burning near the window. He hadn't even realized he'd lit it. "You live near Flat Ridge?" She nodded. "Cabin off Hollow Creek. Just me and her." Luke wiped his hands and looked at her closely for the first time. She couldn't have been older than 30. There was something guarded about her, not in what she said, but in how still she sat, how carefully she watched the room, even now. "What do you do?" he asked. Grace hesitated. "Freelance writing," she said after a pause. "Online stuff. Research mostly." Luke didn't press. He didn't tell her he recognized the way her voice shifted, like someone trained to offer answers that didn't give anything away. He didn't mention that she hadn't once asked who he was, or why a boarded-up clinic still had working equipment and a doctor who knew how to use it. Sophie stirred slightly, and Grace reached for her hand again. Her voice softened. "She'll be okay. She needs rest. Hydration. Monitor her temperature every few hours. Bring her back if the fever spikes again." Grace nodded. "I can pay." Luke shook his head. "No. You needed help. That's enough." She looked at him like she wasn't used to hearing that. After a long pause, she stood slowly, lifting Sophie into her arms. The girl didn't wake, just murmured something and curled closer to her mother's chest. "Thank you, Dr. Halstead." She blinked. "Luke Halstead?" "That's right." Grace stared at him for a moment. "You're the one who used to run this place." Luke didn't respond. He just opened the door. Grace stepped out into the misty morning, her daughter wrapped tight in her arms. Luke watched her go until the sound of her boots on gravel faded into the hush of the hills. Then he turned back inside and locked the door behind him, not because he wanted to keep people out, but because something had cracked open inside him. And he wasn't ready to look at it yet. 3 days passed. Luke tried to forget about the girl, the storm, the clinic door creaking open again after 3 years of silence. He told himself it was a one-time thing. Emergency response. Muscle memory. Nothing more. But the phone started ringing. First it was Mrs. Collins from up on Archer Hill. Her grandson had twisted his ankle. The urgent care clinic was closed on weekends. She remembered when Luke used to fix those things in 15 minutes. Then it was Hank from the feed store. "Chest tightness," he said. "Probably just gas." But the hospital wanted $1,000 just to look at him. And then, a knock. Not panic this time. Just polite. A young woman holding her toddler, who had an ear infection. She didn't even ask if the clinic was open. She just said, "He won't stop crying and you're the only doctor we trust." Luke said no the first time. Then yes. And then yes again. He didn't put the sign back up. He didn't update any listings. But somehow, word spread, Halstead was seeing people again. In secret. In kindness. The clinic came back to life in small ways. The sink ran cold. The cabinet doors stuck less. He cleaned the dust off the scale. Found a few supplies that hadn't expired. He sat on the edge of the old exam table one evening and stared at the walls, wondering when it had stopped feeling like a grave. People started leaving things at the door. Mason jars of soup. A sack of potatoes. A stack of firewood, neatly cut. Someone even left a bag of fresh coffee beans and a note that simply read, "Because we're glad you're still here." Luke didn't smile much. But he didn't lock the clinic door anymore either. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the ridge, he was restocking gauze when a voice came from the doorway. "You look better with the lights on." Luke turned. Grace stood in the doorway, wind in her hair, arms folded across her chest. She wore the same green jacket, mud-stained at the hem. "Sophie's doing well," she said before he could speak. "No fever. She even asked for ice cream yesterday." "That's good," Luke said. Grace stepped inside, her eyes scanning the clinic, the swept floor, the restocked shelf, the open logbook on the desk. "You reopened?" "No," he said. "People just keep showing up." She smiled a little. "You always this bad at accepting thank yous?" He gave a tired shrug. Grace walked over to the counter, set something down. A photograph, printed in matte black and white. It was Luke, seated beside Sophie's hospital bed. His head bent, her hand in his, the storm light curling through the window. "I took it that night," she said. "Didn't plan to. But something about it stuck with me." Luke stared at the photo. "You said you were a writer." "I am." "What kind?" Grace hesitated. "Investigative journalism. Human stories. The kind that usually don't get heard." Luke's brow creased. "You planning to write about this?" "No," she said. "Not unless you want me to." He didn't answer. She nodded once and walked toward the door. Before she left, she added quietly, "I think people deserve to know the ones who still show up when it counts." Then she was gone. Luke looked down at the photo in his hands. For a long time, he didn't move. Luke didn't know about the article until the mail came. A large manila envelope, no return address. Inside, a glossy copy of an East Coast magazine and a sticky note that simply read, "Don't be mad. It's already out. Gee." He flipped to the bookmarked page. There it was. "The Doctor Who Didn't Lock the Door." By Grace Ellison. His name was in the first paragraph. So was the clinic. So was the night of the storm. But it wasn't a tell-all. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. A story about a man who'd once run from grief and ended up helping a stranger's child through a flood, with no questions, no insurance, and no one watching. The photo Grace had taken was printed full page. Luke barely recognized himself in it. Not because it wasn't accurate, but because it looked like a version of him he thought was gone. He didn't know how to feel. He wanted to be angry. But what she wrote, she hadn't betrayed him. She'd seen him. And now, apparently, so had a lot of other people. The first few calls came in that afternoon. Then the emails. Then the letters. A retired nurse from Kentucky wrote, thanking him for reminding her why she joined the profession. A mother from Idaho sent a care package of children's books, for when your waiting room fills up again. Someone from D.C., the National Rural Healthcare Alliance, left a voicemail about a nomination. Luke deleted it. Then, 2 days later, a black sedan pulled into his gravel lot. Out stepped a man in a blazer, holding a badge, smiling like he already knew the answer to every question he was about to ask. "Dr. Halstead," he said. "I'm with the Office of Community Recognition. You've been selected for the Appalachian Medical Honor Roll. A national award." Luke blinked. "I didn't apply." The man chuckled. "Someone nominated you. And the committee took notice." Luke crossed his arms. "This about the article?" "Partly. But it's not just that. We've been tracking patient feedback, rural medical impact trends, grassroots support. What you did, what you're still doing, it's rare. Washington wants to highlight that." Luke's eyes narrowed. "Washington doesn't care about towns like Marlow Creek." The man didn't argue. He just handed Luke an official envelope and said, "Then maybe it's time they started." He left without another word. Luke stood in the parking lot long after the car disappeared down the road. Envelope in hand. Heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with awards. That night, Grace came by the clinic. She didn't say anything at first. Just stood in the doorway, eyes waiting. "You told me you weren't going to write it," he said. "I asked if you wanted me to," she replied. "You never said no." He held up the envelope. "They want me to come to D.C." She raised an eyebrow. "And are you going?" Luke stared at her. Then slowly nodded. "If I do, it's not for the award. It's for the people this might actually help." A pause. Grace smiled. "Then that's exactly why you should." Luke hadn't been on a plane in over a decade. He sat in the last row, window seat, coat folded on his lap, staring down at the patchwork of land far below. When the flight attendant asked if he needed anything, he just shook his head. The man who used to perform surgeries at Vanderbilt now had sweaty palms writing commercial. At Reagan National, a young woman in a blazer met him at the gate. "Dr. Halstead? I'm Marina from the Rural Medical Foundation. We're so honored you came." He followed her through the airport, barely saying a word. The city pulsed with movement. Sirens in the distance, briefcases on every shoulder, shoes clicking like clocks. Luke felt like a man who'd stepped out of a black-and-white photo into a world turned high definition. The event was in a white-columned building near Capitol Hill. Inside, polished floors, handshakes, and too many name tags. He stood near the coffee table, awkward in his only suit, until Marina brought over a smiling man with salt and pepper hair. "Dr. Halstead, this is Senator Ellison." Luke extended a hand. "Senator." The man gripped it firmly. "You're the mountain doctor." Luke gave a half-smile. "That's one way of putting it." "Your story's been passed around the hill like wildfire," the senator said. "That article, honest, moving. You didn't ask for attention. That's why it hit." Luke nodded, unsure how to respond. The senator leaned in slightly, his voice lowering. "You know, the woman who wrote it, Grace, she's my daughter." Luke froze. The words hit like a cold wind. Senator Ellison didn't notice his reaction. "She's been traveling the country for years now. Won awards for some of her investigative work. We don't always agree on methods, but she's got a gift for finding the heart of a story." Luke's voice was quiet. "She didn't tell me who she was." "That's how you know she was being honest." The senator clapped him on the shoulder and wandered off. Luke just stood there. Grace. A senator's daughter. A national journalist. The woman who showed up on his porch in the middle of a storm, not just a desperate mother, but someone who knew exactly what stories mattered. And she'd chosen his. Later that evening, after the speeches and cameras, Luke stepped outside into the cold D.C. night. Grace was waiting near a stone railing, sipping something from a paper cup. "You knew I'd find out eventually," he said. She didn't turn. "I figured you'd walk out when you did." Luke moved to stand beside her. So why didn't you tell me? Grace exhaled. Because the night I knocked on your door, I wasn't a journalist. I was a mom. I was scared out of my mind. And you didn't care who I was. You just helped. And after? Luke asked. She finally looked at him. After I saw what kind of man you were, I realized people needed to know someone like you still existed. A beat of silence. Luke's voice was low. You used your name to help mine. No, she said. I used my story to make the world listen to yours. They stood there in the dark, the city lights glowing behind them. Luke didn't say thank you. But he didn't walk away either. Luke had planned to leave right after the ceremony. But the next morning, Marina called his hotel room with a request he couldn't ignore. The senator's office is asking if you'll attend the healthcare hearing, she said. Closed session. Nothing public. Just a few rural policy reps and committee staff. Luke groaned. I'm not a politician. You don't have to be. Just tell them what you told us. What you've seen. He sighed. I wore my only suit yesterday. You'll be fine. The room was smaller than he expected. Half-moon table. Bottled water at every seat. Luke sat near the corner, shoulders tight, eyes fixed on his hands. Senator Ellison was already speaking when he walked in. I spent most of my career pushing numbers, he was saying. We argued about budgets, not lives. Then someone wrote a story about a man in the mountains who did more with a rusty cabinet and an A4 bag than some clinics do with full funding. There were a few quiet chuckles around the room. Then the senator added, that man sitting right behind me. All heads turned. Luke wanted to disappear into the chair. Dr. Halstead, the senator continued, would you be willing to tell this committee what rural healthcare really looks like on the ground? Luke cleared his throat. Slowly stood. I used to run a clinic in Marlow Creek, he began. It closed after I lost my son. I stopped practicing. People stopped calling. He paused. The room was silent. 3 weeks ago, a woman knocked on my door during a storm. Her daughter had a fever. No power, no ambulances. She was scared. I had what she needed. Not because I was licensed. Not because I was funded. But because I stayed. He looked up. You want to know what rural care looks like? It's patching broken arms with expired gauze. It's treating asthma with sample inhalers. It's being the last place people go when the real system forgets they exist. One of the aides was scribbling furiously. Luke finished quietly. I don't want recognition. But I do want a world where kindness doesn't have to come from desperation. He sat down. For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone murmured, Amen. That afternoon, Senator Ellison made a phone call that surprised even his aides. He instructed his staff to draft an emergency proposal to restore funding to 25 shuttered rural clinics, starting with Halstead's. When asked why the sudden change of heart, he only said, because my daughter reminded me what a good man looks like. Back in the hotel lobby, Luke got a text from Grace. Saw the vote tally. He kept his word. Luke stared at the screen a long while. Then typed back. So did you. The road into Marlow Creek felt different this time. It wasn't the trees, they still bent low over the gravel road like old watchers. It wasn't the hills or the muddy ditches. It was something quieter. Subtler. The way people looked up when Luke drove past. As if they'd been waiting. The clinic porch had flowers on it. A basket of apples. A handwritten card from the local high school civics class. Thank you for not giving up. We won't either. Luke unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Dust had returned, but so had something else, the feeling that this building was meant to do more than store regret. He walked room to room in silence. His coat still hung behind the desk. A box of supplies, newly delivered, waited on the floor. Courtesy of the Rural Medical Reinvestment Initiative, Senator Ellison's pilot program. He didn't smile. But he didn't sit down either. Instead, he opened the windows. Over the next few days, the people came back. Not in crowds. Just one at a time. A boy with poison ivy. An elderly woman who needed her blood pressure meds adjusted. A coal miner with a bad knee and no insurance. Luke didn't put up a price list. He put up a sign. Clinic open, no one turned away. The sign was nailed to the door with a piece of string and an old nail from his father's tool drawer. People noticed. And they brought more than stories. They brought bread. Paint. Help. A crew of local teens repainted the siding. A retired electrician rewired the back office. Someone, no one would admit who, left a brand new heart monitor on the counter one morning with a sticky note. "You'll need this." Luke was overwhelmed. Grateful. Tired. But he never turned anyone away. On Friday evening, as the sun melted behind the ridge, a familiar truck pulled into the clinic lot. Grace stepped out. Sophie was with her, smiling, healthy, wearing a bright pink backpack with glittering straps. She was holding a handmade card that said in crooked crayon letters, "Thank you, Dr. Luke." Sophie ran up and hugged him before he could react. Luke crouched slightly, hands hovering, unsure. Then gently, he returned the hug. Grace stood nearby, watching him. "I thought you'd leave again," she said quietly. Luke looked at her. "I almost did. But you didn't." He shook his head. She smiled. "You're becoming kind of famous around here, you know." "I don't want to be famous." "I know," she said. "That's why you matter." He looked at Sophie, now chasing butterflies in the grass. And for the first time in years, Luke didn't feel like a man waiting for the pain to pass. He felt like someone still capable of healing others, and maybe even himself. Marlow Creek hadn't had a town gathering in years. But one showed up anyway, the evening Luke reopened the clinic officially. They came with folding chairs and thermoses of soup, with mason jars of lemonade and kids still in muddy boots. Someone strung up string lights between the porch columns. Someone else brought a borrowed microphone and an extension cord from the hardware store. Luke didn't make a speech. He just stood there in his plain shirt and clean boots, nodded once, and opened the door wide. It was enough. Grace watched it all from the edge of the crowd. She stood beside Sophie, who had already wandered off to show someone her crayon drawing of the clinic. Grace was quieter now, not guarded, just present. Like she no longer needed to hold her breath. When Luke spotted her across the gravel, he came over with 2 paper cups of lemonade. "You didn't run off this time," he said. She accepted the drink. "Neither did you." He looked down at her shoes, worn, but clean. "How long are you staying?" Grace glanced toward Sophie, who was now giggling near a stack of donated blankets. "I was supposed to leave after the article ran," she said. "Had other stories lined up. Bigger ones, maybe. But I kept pushing them back." Luke nodded. "This town has a way of doing that." A pause. Then she added, "I think I forgot what it felt like to stay in one place." Luke looked at her, really looked at her, the steady calm in her face now, the weight she no longer seemed to carry alone. "Maybe that's the story worth writing," he said softly. She met his eyes. "Or maybe," she replied, "it's the one worth living." Later that evening, after most of the crowd had gone home, Grace stayed behind to help clean up. They folded chairs in silence. Packed up sandwich wrappers. Picked up glittery drawings and juice boxes. Sophie had fallen asleep inside the clinic on the same exam table Luke once used to bring her fever down. "I used to think I was done," Luke said suddenly. "After losing my son, I didn't want to fix anyone. Not even myself." Grace didn't say anything. She didn't have to. He looked at her and added, "But you showed up. Not just at the door that night. You stayed. And I think that gave me permission to stay, too." She nodded, then smiled gently. "We saved each other, didn't we?" Luke glanced at the clinic, where Sophie slept peacefully. "I think we did." That night, Luke didn't lock the door. He left the porch light on. Just in case someone else ever needed to find their way back, too. It happened on a Thursday. Luke was restocking bandages when Grace walked in, holding an envelope and wearing a look he couldn't quite read. She waited until the clinic door closed behind her before speaking. "They offered me a position in New York," she said. "Investigative desk. Big stories. Bigger platform." Luke set down the gauze. "Are you taking it?" Grace hesitated. "I thought I wanted it. I really did. But when I pictured leaving, I couldn't." Luke didn't speak. She stepped closer, her voice softer now. "I'm tired of writing about broken things from a distance. Tired of watching stories end without knowing what happens after the spotlight fades." He met her gaze. "And what do you want instead?" Grace exhaled. "To stay. Here. To give Sophie a home that doesn't change every 6 months. To write from stillness. To belong somewhere." Luke's chest tightened, in that quiet, dangerous way that only hope could manage. "You sure?" he asked. "I am." She handed him the envelope. "It's the offer. I haven't signed it." Luke glanced at it, then back at her. "What do you want me to do with it?" "Hold it for a while," she said, smiling. "Remind me why I didn't take it." The next week, she moved into a small cottage near the base of the hill. The town helped. The sheriff brought tools. The pastor's wife brought curtains. The high school shop class helped fix the porch steps. Sophie chose the bedroom with the window that looked out toward the creek. Luke came by with a box of picture books from the clinic's old reading nook and a bag of hand tools he said were probably cursed with rust. Grace made them tea in mugs that didn't match and laughed for the first time in days. One evening, just as spring hinted at its return, they sat on the front steps of her porch. Sophie was inside, drawing suns with faces and trees with hearts on the trunks. Grace sipped her tea and asked, "Did you ever think this would be your life again?" Luke thought for a long moment. "No," he said. "But I think I finally stopped trying to go back to the one I lost." Grace nodded. Then, softly, she added, "Do you think we're allowed to be happy now?" Luke looked at her. Really looked at her. "I think," he said, "we're allowed to try." Spring came slowly to Marlow Creek. The hills turned soft green. The river thawed and ran clean. Wildflowers pressed through old gravel and turned broken roads into color. The clinic stayed open every day now. Not because of policy or funding, but because people kept showing up. Luke treated sprains, stitched cuts, filled out prescriptions, and answered more questions about allergies and bee stings than he could count. There was always someone waiting. And always a reason to stay. He still didn't take much. Never had. But the donation box stayed full. And the thank you notes piled up on the windowsill. One quiet afternoon, Sophie wandered into the clinic while Luke was updating a chart. She wore her rain boots and a lopsided ponytail, her hands behind her back. "What's that?" Luke asked, looking up. She grinned and revealed a crayon drawing, the front of the clinic, a figure with a stethoscope, and her stick figure self standing beside him. "This is you," she said proudly. "And this is me. And this is Mama with her laptop." Luke took the drawing gently. It's perfect. Sophie leaned in, pointing to the door in the picture. See? It's open. Just like always. He nodded. That's the most important part. Sophie tilted her head. Why? Luke looked out the window. The hills were soft with wind, the trees just beginning to bud. Because if people know the door's open, he said, they'll believe someone's still there. Sophie seemed to consider that. Then she hugged him, the kind of hug kids give when they mean it. And Luke held on just a little longer. That night, Grace sat beside him on the clinic porch. They didn't talk much. The sun dipped low, painting the hills in amber and silence. After a while, she spoke. You know what I keep thinking about? Luke glanced at her. That night. The storm. Me showing up on your doorstep. He chuckled softly. You think I could forget? She shook her head. It wasn't just that you helped. It was that you didn't hesitate. Not even for a second. You just showed up. Luke looked down at his hands, weathered but steady. I didn't think it would matter, he said. Didn't think it would change anything. Grace smiled. But it did. He looked over at her. And she added, because when you show up for others, sometimes the world finds a way to show up for you. Luke didn't reply. He just reached over, took her hand, and held it. Not like someone who needed saving. But like someone who'd finally remembered what it meant to stay. Thank you for watching the video to the end. If you liked it, please like it, leave a comment below the video, and subscribe so you don't miss more impressive and interesting stories from people's lives.